or ended up with something else, a conflict where they couldn't join us today. Morgan and I sit on the continuous improvement team here at State Support Team 11, and she'll also be monitoring the chat today. She'll be posting some things. We do have some resources to share, a couple of quick activity type things to show you that you can participate in. So if you have any questions or anything, Morgan is going to monitor the chat as we go through this today. The resources for today were emailed out to you earlier this week. If you didn't get that, at the bottom of the screen is the bit.ly link, and then the QR code on the left-hand side of the screen should also take you to the resources for the presentation. We've linked the PowerPoint presentation, so you'll have that as a resource. There's some other links then embedded within the PowerPoint presentation that you can have. You can make copies and share it with your own staff, with other folks that you work back with your schools or districts. And then we also will have some links for you at the end, as long as, or in addition to some our email addresses and some opportunities if you want to ask questions or even set up maybe a session of coaching, or even have us come out and talk to your folks, depending on where you are in the process. This process is this session is part of a 6-part series that we here at SST 11 are going to do today and then the next 5 Fridays. Back in the fall, we surveyed our community school contacts that we had in our region, basically to do a needs assessment, to ask where folks thought their areas of greatest need are. We tallied up those surveys, and the 6 areas that you see on the screen are the top 6 that were identified. And so today we're doing a high improvement process, but then the next 5 Fridays we'll be doing, one of them will be myself with family and community engagement. Dr. Morgan has some, and then some other consultants at SST 11 will be doing those sessions. You can sign up for all 6, or you can pick and choose ones that have particular interest to you. But mostly, like I said, those were our top areas that people indicated of need. And so we wanted to offer some sessions. We also asked when the best time to do these sessions, and kind of overwhelmingly, Friday was the best time. That was kind of mixed between virtual and in person. And we thought we'd start out at least this series with a virtual session, allowing people still to stay in their buildings if they needed that time there today. We set up an agenda. We're doing introductions now. Essentially, we're going to do an overview of the Ohio improvement process. One of the first tasks we're going to do in the chat is kind of, you tell us, or you can even do it unmute if you wanted to, where you are in the process, what your familiarity is, whether you've been through the process before or whether you're just beginning the process. Are you in cohort 1 who's doing their 1 needs assessment and their 1 plan this spring, or are you down the road and just trying to get more information? We have supporting implementation, which we'll talk about your team setup. We'll review the 5 steps of the OIP, provide you some resources at the end, and then talk about our review and our next steps, particularly if you want to line up any additional coaching sessions with any of us here at SST 11. This is me. I was in the Hilliard schools for a long time in a variety of positions. My most recent position in Hilliard, I was a building principal at the middle school level for the last 12 years. I have started at SST 11 here in August, and not only work in continuous improvement, but also work in the area of family engagement. This is Dr. Morgan. Dr. Morgan has had a variety of positions in several school districts. Dr. Morgan is also on the continuous improvement team here at SST 11, and she is also a regional data lead. And Morgan does a great job of finding the data and pouring through the data. And as we work through this, again, if you need some additional support as far as data retrieval or data interpretation, Dr. Morgan might be your contact. Just a couple of things, and some of you've been through Zoom things before. You've got yourself muted already. Just mute during the presentation. There will be some times where you can participate, and same thing with questions. If you've got questions, you can put them in the chat, or there's a small enough amount of us today. If you want to unmute and just ask the questions, that'll be fine too. Whoops, went the wrong way. if you could right now, and we've got your names up on the screen, but if you don't mind in the chat box, just type in, again, your name, what school or district or organization you represent, and what your role in that organization is. And then we'll kind of monitor the chat just to get to know you a little bit better. We'll give you a minute or so to do that. Well, thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, maybe you could help us with the presentation if you've been through it numerous times.
Oh, I am much better at just listening in and taking everything I can get from it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jill. Yeah, cohort one is doing their one needs assessment and one plan right now. And so if there's anything we can do to help, then Jennifer, thank you. All right, so you know us a little bit better, and we've got a little bit more information on you. A little bit about us. I don't know if you've worked with state support team before. Again, Dr. Morgan and I are new here. There are 16 state support teams around the state of Ohio. We are Region 11. We are primarily Franklin County and then the 6 counties that connect to Franklin County. We do different kinds of supports with the schools and districts in that region. We do professional development like we're doing today. We do virtual. We'll come into districts and do professional development. We also do professional development at the ESC of Central Ohio. We have offices at the ESC out here by the airport. In fact, there's a couple of in-person PDs going on this morning here. We also offer coaching. We will come in and work with your district or your school. There are individual consultants at state support team that are assigned to particular districts, regions, the community schools. And particularly, I know those of us who work with some of the community schools are assigned with a sponsor. And so if you haven't had the opportunity to reach out, we can connect you with the particular consultant from state support team who is assigned to your district or your operating firm sponsor. Like I said, there's 16 regions around the state of Ohio. We work closely together. We have 86 right now community schools in our region, and we've kind of divided folks up, and some are in different levels, again, with the cohorts 1, 2, and 3, but some are in schools forward. Some are identified with CSI, ATSI, those kinds of things. So we can certainly match you up or work with individual schools and or districts as needed. Our learning intentions today, basically to understand the team structures. If you've been through the process before, some of the things that we're going to tell you or review, some of the slides will probably be repeat for you. If you've not been through the process before, it'll just be a kind of a quickie, and then you can keep this as a resource. We're going to identify and use some of the tools, particularly the implementation rubric, the Ohio Improvement Process implementation rubric. And then we're going to identify some actionable steps for you to take back. One of our goals with these sessions is to give you some things that you can take back, either work with the schools you work with the regions that you work with, and hopefully help you as you work with them. Our success, obviously, if you know the Ohio Improvement Process and be able to talk to the folks that you work with, know why we do the OIP, and they'll apply the actions to take place in the steps of the OIP. Again, we're going to hopefully give you some resources that you can take back then to your districts and work with them. All right, so the improvement process, you kind of already answered this question. Our first task was just to kind of give us a background of what you know about the OIP and what you've done with the OIP. Sounds like all of you at least have had some experience with the Ohio Improvement Process. This is a slide from the State Department, talks about what the process is. The process is the recommended framework that allows you to work on continuous improvement with the overall goal of impacting student achievement. I know there's a lot of other continuous improvement tools or vehicles that districts and schools may have already used. But what the Ohio improvement process does is it gives you a template, a consistent template to use so that there's some consistency among schools and districts and then with the Department of Education. The main parts when we get talking about Ed Steps, the one needs assessment and the one plans, and then connecting you with your funding sources. And again, sounds like some of you have been through this process already. The 5-step process, the graphic, the circle, you may have seen before, goes through the 5 steps with identify critical needs, research and select evidence-based strategies, plan for implementation, implement, monitor, and examine, reflect, and adjust. I think the key takeaways are in the blue there. It supports the entire system as a learning organization. When we start talking about the levels of teams within the district and the building, and then the teacher-based teams, this process and then the Ed Steps process allows you to support the entire system as an organization. We'll talk a lot about data. A lot of the decisions or most of the decisions that you're going to make regarding your goals and your action steps and even your needs that we're going to identify are based on data. We're building a capacity. I think a key piece down in the 4th blue box down there, an open and collaborative culture. This is not going to be, or the improvement process is not designed for a person or a small group of people to create an improvement plan and then send it out to everyone and have everyone kind of fall in line. This process is designed for some open communication 2 ways, from the district down to the buildings, to the teachers, and then in the opposite direction for the teachers to communicate back and forth. And then obviously like a system of ongoing improvement. That's the goal. The one needs assessment and the one plan are a 3-year plan, but I think we're always going to be looking at improvement ongoing, a continuous improvement plan. I know the district that I was in, we did yearly continuous improvement plans on the local level. Ed Steps, if you've worked with the one needs assessment and the one plan before, Ed Steps is the education department system of tiered E plans and supports. And the key pieces again there are the one needs assessment and then the one plan, and it connects to the funding. The Ed Steps process, had somebody email me yesterday, is found again through the department's website. And I'm not sure who all has access. I know you go through your OHID on the department's website and there's an Ed Steps tile. Just the 3 of you that are on today, do you have, and you can just unmute or you can put in a chat, do you have access to the schools, the buildings that you work with, the districts that you work with? Do you have access to their one plans and one needs assessments through the Ed Steps tile on the department's website? Just, you can put a yes or a no, or you can unmute and just tell us.
Yes, I do.
You do? Good.
Yes, I do.
Good.
I know I used to, but I'm not sure if I do anymore because we've kind of changed things in-house a little bit, but I know our principal does.
Okay, great. And that's good to know that you guys at least have access, that you can help your buildings out. We not sure who all has, but particularly if you've done any kind of changes recently. There's the department's website, the Ed Steps website there. And again, if you've done it before, you're kind of familiar with some of the resources that are available on the website. I like these graphics. There's 2 graphics here that kind of align the one needs assessment, the one plan, and the steps with kind of a color-coded way with the 5 steps on the wheel. Again, talking about a 3-year plan. And then this graphic I like a lot. It's one that kind of takes you through the steps in kind of a brief way. And again, this is something that I think if you have access to, you could share with the buildings and the schools that you work with. And it just kind of gives you a quick capsulization of the process. One plan is the strategic plan. You can access your plan if you want to while we're going through this, or if you've got another plan. I mean, it's not important or not necessary that you do that, but we put that slide in there just in case you had your plan pulled up. And as we go through questions, if there were specific questions about the plans, if you have access to the plans with the schools that you work with. But again, if you don't, that's fine too. It won't be mandatory for this session. All right, so the first step, it used to be called step 0. It's the supporting implementation center. It's in the center of that wheel. And it basically talks about setting up your team structures with your teacher-based teams, your building leadership teams, and your district leadership teams. And it gives you some of the kind of the norms around those teams, that they're inclusive, they have meeting norms and promote open discussion and positive learning culture. We're working with a district right now and revising and revamping their district leadership team, and that's the first step. Aligning who's going to be on the team, but then also setting those norms for those teams. Third bullet down, when are they going to meet and how regularly are they going to meet? And we're going to keep that time separate to meet. And then we talked about the two-way communication, those established communication feedback loops. This graphic talks again about the team structure and how it's set up throughout the district and then all the way up to the state leadership team. And then the goal would be for the teacher-based teams, the building leadership teams, and district leadership teams to work together through the process with the ultimate goal for all of the continuous improvement. No matter what we're doing with a continuous improvement process, the goal is for positive student outcomes. Talked a little bit about the collaborative teams and the DLT, BLTs, and the TBT structures. Here's some items that you can take back. 3 slides just tell you a little bit about the teacher-based teams, who can be on the teacher-based teams. And the first activity we're going to do here in a second or two is going to talk about your individual schools and how their teams are set up. The teams can be set up and aligned through content areas, via grade levels. They can be interdisciplinary teams. That'll be one of the interesting things to learn is just how are the teams, the teacher-based teams in your schools set up. The building leadership teams, that's the group that gets together to make decisions for the building. Can be, again, representatives from each of the teacher-based teams, can be other representatives. Since I do sit on family and community engagement, one of the pieces that we've been discussing is how do you involve family and community members in some of these team structures. When you do your one plan and your one needs assessment, it does ask you for stakeholder involvement. And that's a one that would be interesting to see how your particular schools, or if they are able to engage all their stakeholders, including families and community members in this process. And then your district leadership teams. And again, I'm not sure exactly how your setup works with your sponsorship group and your operating, who sits on that district leadership team. But there should be a district team that gets together, that examines data, identifies the needs, and then works with this process. So the big screen that we had to start with is, do you have the right people on the teams? And that's going to be kind of our first activity as we look through this here. Obviously, when you set those norms for the teams, you're going to work on the mission, vision, and core beliefs. That's something that we think is not optional, that your teams have the building mission, vision, and core beliefs in mind. The communication we talked about, the shared leadership kind of touched on. Again, it's not going to be one person or one group of people making all the decisions. The purposeful decision-making refers to that data that you're going to collect both in the needs assessment process and then as you implement your plan, keeping and tracking the data to see the effectiveness of your plan. And then the resource management teams. We want you to work together as a team to kind of direct the resources and how you're going to support the district and the school goals. All right, so the first activity that we have, if you've looked at it before, it's called the Ohio Improvement Process Implementation Rubric. Morgan's going to drop that in the chat for you if you haven't been able to pull it up on the resources. I've kind of shared it on my screen. The implementation rubric is really a great tool because it starts with the supporting implementation step 0, but there's a rubric for every step in the process. What we're going to look at today, I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes to go through just this first section where it says supporting implementation. And there's 4 categories: the inclusive team structure, the focus, the team culture and structure, and then the communication. And then there's 3 levels of the rubric, 0, 1, and 2. This would be a great activity that you could take back and work with either the principals that you work with or the building leadership teams that you work with. where they can kind of do a self-assessment. You can do a self-assessment of where your teams are, where their teams are right now. And you can kind of rate yourself on the right, a 0, 1, or 2. And again, it's intended to be an honest look at where your teams are right now. At the bottom, you can give yourself a subtotal of points out of 8. And then there's 2 open boxes. One that says what questions might the team want to consider? And the second one is what are the areas of strengths, areas of growth, and barriers and next steps that you might see? So, and again, I know that a couple of you said you've already been through this process, but what we would like to do for the next 4 or 5 minutes is just have you, if you have access to what Morgan's put in the chat, just kind of go through. You don't have to necessarily, you could write it on a piece of paper or on a sticky note if you've got it, and just score where maybe you think the teams are that you work with, and then maybe what the strengths are you see in your teams, and then areas for growth and what your next steps are. So I'm going to mute for about 3 or 4 minutes. If you don't mind, kind of work through that very first rubric, and then we'll come back out and ask you just to kind of share where you think your teams are for right now. Thanks.
I am driving right now, so I won't be able to do this, but I'm happy to chime in whenever I can. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know you were driving. We'll give you everybody a couple of minutes, and then we can come back and maybe just verbally you can tell us where you think the teams are that you work with, where the team structure is. So hopefully you had a time or a little bit of time, particularly, sorry, if you're driving, to look through this rubric. Since we've got a small enough group, you want to just kind of tell us real quickly, where do you think your team, the schools that you work with, where your teams are, how your team structures are. Are they effectively working, or where do you think you are with your teams at the structures of schools that you work with?
I would say for us that we're kind of more like ones across the board. The only reason that I didn't give us some twos is because I feel like, and we talk about this all the time, but we have a hard time sometimes getting stakeholders from outside of our building
Okay.
included to those discussions. We communicate all the time, you know, with our teachers are communicating all the time with parents, and we're having events and having different things like that. But it's not always, you know, our events are not necessarily data driven. It's just to get family engagement, you know, more of that going. The teachers are talking with parents about data and how their kids are performing and progress and all of that stuff. But in a big forum, we don't, you know, that's kind of where we're lacking. And we talk about that all the time, that we need to get, you know, the stakeholders from outside in, but sometimes we struggle with that. So
Do they do any kind of data tracking on parent involvement, numbers of parents that come to events, number of parents that are involved in surveys or anything like that?
we used to be really good at doing that before COVID, and then COVID
Okay.
hit, and you know, it drastically went down because we had to. So I mean, we do events all the time here, and the communication, or the events that we've held this year, like they've been drastically, we've gotten more involvement than what we've ever had in the past. So I think parents are finally excited to, you know, get back into the building and do some of that kind of stuff with their kids. I don't know that we've necessarily like tracked data on it, if you will,
Okay.
but we definitely have more engagement than we did, you know, before. So
Good. Well, and it is hard, particularly when teams might meet, if they meet during the school day, having parents or families, community to be physically present during the meeting, but, you know, even including someone via a Zoom link or any other kinds of ways that you might be able to connect families with that.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Does your school, or do you guys have, do they set up any kind of like a parent teacher organization, a PTA or a PTO or anything like that?
We've had them in the past. Unfortunately, we had to do away with them because some you know, I don't know how to say it, inappropriate things going on with parents that were involved in that. So we're trying to get it back in here, but we have to be smart and strategic on who's in charge and how it's run and who's in charge of, you know, money and stuff like that. So
Okay.
we haven't had any success with getting it back in back into our school just yet, but that's our goal.
Okay. And do your building level team, your building leadership teams, they meet regularly and
Yes, we meet every other week as a leadership team, and then I know the teachers are meeting all the time with coaches, like once a week, if not more, and then they have individual meetings with teachers as well, depending on the need for the teachers. So there's, yeah, I would definitely say we definitely have enough of that going on.
Good.
So, and we're talking about data all the time and bringing
Good.
that in and looking at multiple data, you know, data points, not just looking at the state scores. You know, we're looking at STAR and the other assessments that we do in house and things like that. So
Good. Okay. Thank you. Jill,
Yeah.
anything that you'd like to add about the way the teams are structured and that you work with?
So that kind of sounds very similar to where we are at. Our London location, we are actually meeting with Dr. Morgan and Kim, and I think Dr. Linda are all coming to our location this afternoon to start digging into the assessment authoring platform so that we can kind of start our TPTs. They meet regularly. Our BLT meets regularly. We need to kind of enhance how we are using the data. We bring data, we look at STAR data, we discuss, you know, we've kind of revamped our curriculum, make sure that everything is completely aligned to the standards, but we still need to enhance how we are using the data to drive student improvement. So I think we're doing a lot of the things right. We just need to get a little bit deeper with how we're using the data.
Good. Well, I'm glad you guys yeah, I knew that Dr. Morgan was coming out this afternoon, so that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is kind of work then through the rest of the slides. It sounds to me like most of you are pretty familiar with the process. There's not a lot that's new to the OIP, the system that's been in place for the last couple of years. We're gonna this presentation back in the fall here in person at SST11 here at the ESC, we did a thing called an OIP reboot, which was a day-long session that some of these slides are from and some of these activities are from. Obviously, in the short time that we had today, our intention was just to kind of review the steps to the process and then connect you with some of those resources. We can talk at the end maybe about your schools that are in cohort 1 a little bit more specifically. But the next few slides are just going to take us through the process. And so we'll kind of go through those relatively quickly. And again, not knowing who and however many folks were going to join us today, we kind of presented this kind of across the board, particularly if anybody wasn't familiar with the process at all. So let me go through these slides, the 5 steps. If there is anything that maybe as I go through this that connects with you and you want me to stop and ask a question. But again, I think the 5 steps might be kind of similar if you've been through the process already. So identify the critical needs as the first step. And you're building the schools that are in cohort 1, the needs assessment questions came out in January, and hopefully they and you have had an opportunity to look at those questions. There's a series of required questions and then some that are just recommended. Not all buildings districts have to answer all the same questions. The data, your individual data, triggers those questions that your buildings or schools have to answer. So the identify critical needs is the first step, tells you which are the right ways to go. We've got some slides that talk about the district and building level teams, reviewing the plans. We're going to talk a little bit about a root cause analysis and some of the tools that are recommended to do a root cause analysis, and then hopefully allowing you to identify some of the gaps and provide more information. Your teacher-based teams, again, are going to be involved in this process, collecting the data. The goal, at least with the one needs assessment, is for the buildings to do, the schools to do the one needs assessment first and collect all their data. And then that is funneled to the district team, where the district team kind of aggregates that together, creates a district needs assessment, and then that kind of moves into the one plan. We talk a little bit about the one needs assessment. It is directly connected to your data, the individual data of the school or the district. We talked about the recommended questions. You're encouraged to use additional, you talked about the internal data, Jill, that you were talking about, the other things that you're using, the STAR and some of that other data. And I think it gives you a real good opportunity at all 3 levels to review that data and then also share with each other what that data identifies, the needs that it's identified. Talking about your quantitative and your qualitative data, you've already talked to that a little bit about the different kinds of data that you use. Some of the quantitative data you've already touched on were the test results, the test scores. Other things that you can look at, particularly if you've got, if your school has a pretty involved PBIS program, you can look at your attendance data and your behavior data. I know there's some tiered fidelity inventories that the PBIS folks use to measure different kinds of data. And particularly of interest, and if Morgan's coming out and talking to your group about data, is your subgroup data. When you look at your report card or any of the other, how are your subgroups in your attendance or your assessments, are they performing? That qualitative data, we're talking about that adult data, the adult implementation data. And again, depending on how your district is set up or your school is set up, you can take the surveys, the discussions. One of the key pieces is walkthrough observations. We just recently were invited to walk through and do a day-long walkthrough with some of the community schools in our area, which was really kind of a great tool for us to get into buildings. It was a very good day where they had organized certain classrooms, certain things that they were looking for. We walked through along with all the administrators and some other folks and were able to provide some feedback. It was a really good idea. The root cause analysis, we like this graphic of the iceberg because it talks about what's above the surface, but then, you know, share with your folks, you need to dig down and see what's happening below the surface. With the root cause analysis, there's a couple of different kinds of tools. There's various tools. The 5 why analysis we like, and there's lots of research that you can look up with the 5 whys. You just keep asking the questions why until you get down to the root cause. And there's an example on the right-hand side of the problem that was identified. Fishbone technique is one that they also recommend, where you can kind of then create. This is a good one if you are working together with a team of people and you can get their input, and each team can participate in identifying the stages there. The big thing that we're looking for is focus on energies of what you can control and influence. And it's easy to look all the time about student data. What we want to do is as we're looking at identifying those critical needs, what can we do as the adults, as the staff, as the teachers, as the administrators do to have an influence on that student performance? Going through the process, then you're going to look and try to identify those priority needs. When you're doing the one needs assessment, those priority needs, if you identify the needs that you see as priority needs, those get automatically moved over to your one plan. And that when we start talking about the one plan, that allows those needs to be part of your plan you're going to set goals for. So that's kind of your first step. You're going to look at what are the critical needs. Some of them are going to be the questions identified by the district, but you can also, or by the state with the one needs assessment, but you can also then identify those needs that you see independent of those questions. And you can also answer any of the questions on the one needs assessment that aren't required. If you find an area that you want to have your schools look at as a group, you can definitely kind of use that there. So then the second step, once you've identified those critical needs, is and your root cause is to research and select evidence-based strategies. Dr. Morgan and I took some training earlier this year on evidence-based strategies. When you're looking at an evidence-based strategy, when you're in your one plan, it is connected to some of those evidence-based clearinghouses and databases. ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, has 4 different tiers of strategies. And the evidence-based strategies are those that have been researched and show evidence of having positive student outcomes. And that's what you want to look at. It's going to save you some time. It's going to save you resources. If you kind of go and look at those strategies that have already been proven to be effective with increasing student outcomes. So the district and building level teams research the strategies. What your teacher-based teams then are going to do is also research strategies and how they align to what the district's doing. Why use evidence-based strategies? There's a greater likelihood of positive student outcomes. If it's already been proven that it has some success, then it's going to be a quicker way for you to maybe get that strategy. And then it assures you the time and resources are going to go towards evidence of achieving those positive student outcomes that we're looking for. There's the ESSA. There's 4 tiers of evidence with ESSA: strong evidence, moderate, promising, and demonstrates a rationale. Tier 1, that's strong evidence. What that means is that there's strong evidence from at least one well-designed and implemented study that this strategy improves student outcomes. And with moderate evidence, it's the same thing. There's at least one well-designed and implemented study that's going to show that there's moderate evidence. You can only be on level 1 and 2 if the research shows that that strategy improves student outcomes. Tier 3 is promising evidence. And then tier 4 is a strategy that shows a rationale. It may not meet the research of tiers 1, 2, and 3. You can still choose tier 4 strategies, but then you just understand that then you're going to have to do the research. You're going to have to commit to kind of seeing if this and evaluating a strategy to see if it actually works. So when you're looking at choosing those strategies and how they line up on the one plan, that's where the tiers come to play. Where do you find these strategies? There's various places that people are looking online, TikTok and Twitter, and I know people belong to Facebook groups. What we're going to recommend is that you not use all these outside, the teacher paid teachers and those kinds of things. We're going to recommend that you use the evidence-based clearinghouses, and the clearinghouses, the collection of the research strategies. Each one of these are different clearinghouses. They have different kind of practices and rating scales. The one that's connected to the one plan is the Ohio Evidence-Based Clearinghouse. When you connect to that, it is connected through the one plan. It does have kind of links to some of these others. Dr. Morgan and I, we did, like I said, training earlier in the fall, and we got to actually go in and examine some of these other clearinghouses and resources. And there's a lot of good information in there. And again, it's designed to save your team's time as you look through and try to research what strategies are going to be chosen to meet the needs and the root causes that you've identified. In your resources folder, we did link this sheet with some live links. So as you go back and work with your teams in your own districts and schools, that you can then see, you can use that. Based on effect size, how are they ranking if you've done any of the reading on John Hattie's research with effect size, particularly in the area of visible learning, a lot of the rating scales are all based on the effect size, and you can, again, go back and research if you want to further look into some of that, particularly with the MetaX website. So as you go back and look at what strategies, no matter what strategy that you're choosing, if it's got an evidence-based strategy, it still has to fit with what works for you in the local environment. And so listed here are some of the things to think about as you review those strategies. How does it fit with your particular school that you're working with? It may become a greatest tier 1 strategy, but it may be too expensive for the resources that you have available. It may be another highly recommended strategy, but is it feasible for implementing with your school and your staff? And there's some steps that you can look at to go as you review those particular strategies. We take a quick pause with either the needs assessments or the evidence-based strategies. Those of you that have your schools in cohort 1, are you doing the needs assessment? Have they done their needs assessment right now? And kind of where are they and how are they doing as far as selecting strategies or getting to that? Have they gotten to that point yet?
We are actually meeting next week to start looking at our questions. So
Okay.
That's the same for us. We, our principal emailed out the needs assessments questions for all of us to start taking a look at, so that way we can get together to answer them. So
Good, good. Well, and again, if you need any kind of help or assistance from us, feel free to reach out. That's kind of where we can help with any of the process too. All right, so the next 3 steps, we're going to plan for implementation. This is where your one plan comes in. You're going to, when you work with the one needs assessment, those priority needs that you identify move over into your one plan. As you look at your teams look at making their plan, you're going to focus on those critical needs and the evidence-based strategies that you've identified in the previous 2 steps. You're going to be creating SMART goals. It's recommended that you have a limited number of good SMART goals. You don't want to kind of overextend yourself. And so they do need to match up with those priority needs that you've already selected. Same with the evidence-based strategies. In your One Plan SMART goals, you're going to set what is the progress monitoring process that you're going to use, what student data you're going to look at, what adult implementation data you're going to look at. You're going to set that up in advance. And when it comes to the steps where you're going to implement and monitor, having those set up in advance are going to be key, because that is going to give you what to look for. Once you do that, you're going to create action steps within the One Plan. And those action steps are going to be matched up with specific strategies that you're going to have that align with your goals. Some of the things as far as those action steps we can kind of work through here, where there's the building and district team levels, checking with the strategies. The district level teams are going to create the goals. And then when you get to your building level teams, you're going to make sure that the goals are aligned and the things that you're doing as far as implementation are going to be able to be implemented with fidelity. There's kind of a slide about the leadership roles. Again, DLT is going to create the plan. The BLT is going to make sure that what they're working on is aligned to the plan. And then the teacher-based teams are going to make sure things are aligned to the learning standards and the school or the district plan. You selected those strategies in the previous one, and so now you're going to create the goals to meet those strategies. The progress monitoring data, you're going to choose what student data we're going to monitor to make sure the students are making progress towards the goals. And the same thing with your adult implementation data. And a lot of this is going to come up with ways to, how are you going to measure the level at which the strategy you've chosen is being implemented by the teachers in the building. And again, go back to the surveys, walkthroughs, those kinds of things. Your action steps, they recommend evidence strategies have 3 to 5 action steps per year. And remembering that this is a 3-year plan that their teams are creating. And so your action steps then are going to be, you can have a year 1, year 2, and year 3 action steps as you work your way through the plan. Some of the things to consider when you're writing your action steps, professional learning. What professional learning needs to happen to achieve your goals? And I can't say that this is going to be one of the critical steps. As you choose these potentially new initiatives, strategies that you're going to be working on, what is the professional learning that you need to have your staff go through in order to implement that? Again, I think that's going to be just a crucial piece. Human capital, what staffing adjustments need to be made to achieve your goals? Essentially, do you have the right people in the right places? Or do you need to kind of make some adjustments with your staff? The fiscal resources, what's it going to cost? How are you going to fund your plan? How are you going to fund the goals that you've created? And then the roles of the systems, is your system set up to facilitate the process that you're going to go through? Or do you need to make any kind of adjustments in the system? Just kind of a sidelight, our lead here at SST and continuous improvement is a big proponent of Guskey's 5 levels of professional development evaluation. We've linked the whole rubric to Guskey's professional development evaluation into your resources. As you look at designing, or your teams look at designing professional learning, professional development towards the One Plan or the One Needs assessment, this gives you a rubric and a tool to evaluate how effective your PD is going to be. Once you've got your plan, make sure all your stakeholders know the plan. We talked about stakeholders already. It's important that we're communicating district level, the building level, the teacher level, but how are you going to communicate to all the rest of your stakeholders? We've already talked about families and communities a little bit. What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? I think that's an important piece to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Takes us to step 4, implement and monitoring. This step is a fairly straightforward, because now that you've got your plan in place, you've got your strategies, you've got your action steps, you're going to implement the plan and monitor it. So you're going to put your strategies into practice. Implementation is putting things into practice. It says there it's going to require changes in adult practices and behaviors. What are the adults doing? What's the staff doing to try to increase your student outcomes? On a previous slide, I talked a little bit about you may have to deselect a strategy or something that you're doing right now. We've all been there before where we keep adding and adding to the plate without ever taking anything away. And so we need to look at the strategies that we're putting into place. The monitoring is the collaborative learning, observing the implementation, and how is the implementation that the adults are doing in the building impacting on student outcomes. Couple of steps here for the teams and the district levels. I think this is a key piece here. They recommend a rapid cycle problem solving. It's basically collecting adult and student data and analyzing in a short cycle analysis. It measures you the effectiveness more quickly, and what it's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you then to kind of make any changes in course as you're working through it. If you're doing it short cycle assessments and you're seeing things are going well, you keep going on that course. If you do your short cycle assessments and things are not going exactly how you planned, this gives you the opportunity to make some changes, to make some additions, some adjustments while you're doing the plan, while things are being implemented. And I think that is kind of cool because it also allows you to change your one plan if you need to. You are going to be able to amend your one plan. But that short cycle assessment, the roles for the district and building level teams, the roles of the teacher level teams are very important. I think the key piece with the teacher teams is as you analyze that data is communicating to your building team and then the building team to the district team. How is it going? How do you progress monitor? Again, the formative assessments, talked about the diagnostic assessments, the subgroup of analysis, the walkthroughs, the TBT meetings, the TBT forums, any kind of surveys, any kind of data that you can gather. Some of it might just be conversations that you have at your TBT meetings of how things are going. There's a quote from Malcolm Gladwell that we like, has to do with practice. Basically, if we're going to put these strategies into practice, you have to give time for people to practice and then provide feedback on how it's going. The final step to the process is as you're implementing and you kind of look at is how are you going to see whether what you're doing is working? 3 questions to ask your teams. Where do we start? Where are we now? And where do we go next? And you're going to examine and reflect your data. And so once you put your plan into place, once you've got your student outcomes, you're going to look at 3 different areas: your goal achievement, your implementation, and your communication. In goal achievement, was the intended outcome reached? Did you meet your goals? The implementation phase, were the strategies implemented as designed? Were they implemented with fidelity? And then in a communication phase, was the information shared amongst all the levels so that everybody knew how things were going? And you do your adjustments by identifying the next steps. And again, that should be handled at the team level. Basically asking yourself and asking your teams, how did it go? A couple of slides here on the examining, reflecting, and adjusting from the district and the building level teams, the teacher-based teams, how you're going to review the effectiveness of what you've implemented. And the big question is, did you reach your goals? All right, so as you reflect back at the end of the process, why was the implementation fully, partially, or not successful? I think that's the big thing. If you're meeting or exceeding your expectations, then you're going to continue your practices and make plans to expand into other classrooms, other schools. If your strategies weren't being implemented systematically, then the teams need to identify the gaps and then include in your plan of action steps to ensure that it's going to be implemented effectively. If it's not being implemented as it was designed to do, why? Why is it not being implemented? Where is it? Go back to professional learning? Do we need to train the staff more? What is it that is causing it not to be implemented in fully? And then if the practices are fully being implemented and the improvements are not occurring, then you need to examine, is that the right strategy? Did we choose the right strategy in the first place? And these are decisions that your team can make at the end when you look at your final data. As you adjust, you're going to identify, communicate your next steps, modify or eliminate practices we talked about, and then change your progress monitoring tools. Do we need to come up with other ways to determine the effectiveness of our plan? Again, that was a quickie going through those 5 steps. It sounds like you have had some familiarity with the process already. As we said, nothing has really changed as far as the process is concerned. I think what we're finding is we're working with schools, particularly as you get down the building level and the teacher level. A lot of times the staff in the actual buildings are not as familiar with the process. They've not been through the 5-step process and some of the, I would encourage, if you've got your teams already structured in place, to maybe as you get ready to do that process, as you're going through one of these assessments with the teams that you've got set up, take them real quickly through what this 5-step process looks like, because I think it's important for those folks that are implementing this plan to know why we're doing it. What's the process? What's it look like? And what is the role that they're playing in this process? Because all 3 levels play a role in this improvement process. You know, the improvement is continuous. The plan that you're going to create is not designed to go up on the shelf and we just continue to do stuff. And we do this out of compliance, that we do a plan just because the state says we have to do a plan. The idea for the plan is that it is going to impact student achievement in a positive way. And it sounds like the schools and districts that you're working with are kind of on board with that. This is a link, and I'm going to kind of pull it up from the department's website with a lot of the resources for the OIP. Morgan and I attend state meetings, and one of the subcommittees is working on the top tools for the improvement process. As you look here, it has 10 tools that the state has identified that could help. Everything from the EdSteps process, some of the slides that we went through today, root cause analysis procedures. If your folks need help with writing SMART goals, there's a SMART goals checklist. Talks about, again, the supporting implementation and how do we set up our district and building level teams, implementation stuff for TBTs, and then kind of the protocols there. I would encourage, again, if your staff or your folks haven't had resources, just provide them with this resource here. Let them play around a little bit so that they can maybe find something that works best for them. In a quick review on the process, supporting implementation was that step 0, making sure that your teams are set up. Step 1, you're going to identify your priority needs using qualitative and quantitative data. Step 2, save time and use what works. Use those evidence-based interventions. Step 3, the planning piece is important. Create your goals, your strategies, your action steps. And then once that's completed, clearly communicate your plan to all your stakeholders. Step 4, put your plan into action. Use that short cycle, continuous plan to monitor and implement. And then finally, at the end, look at how you've done, monitor, observe, see how it's done. Did you meet your goals? And then make adjustments as needed. So in a brief manner, those are kind of the 5 steps to the process. The last thing that we want to do is kind of link you with one more resource and then open it up, take some questions, kind of let us know, particularly if you're getting ready to work with the needs assessments, where areas that we might be able to help. This activity document was created for that day-long session that I was kind of referring to earlier. This would be a really great thing to do with the schools or the staffs that you work. It has activities that are set up for each one of the sections to that implementation rubric that you worked on previously, that you had the 0, 1s, or 2s. This very first rubric kind of box looks at the supporting implementation that you did in step 0. Depending on where you rated yourself, and somebody said you rated yourself like a number 1, this will take you with some links to some resources. So if you rate yourself in this, we're progressing improvement, this gives you some resources that you can take back to your staff and feel free to make copies of this and take it with you. Something to watch if you want your staff to watch a video, something to read if you'd rather have them do kind of an article or kind of a study there, something to listen to if you're more inclined to do podcasts, or something to do, some activities to do. And I think this is a really cool resource, because then you can make an action step. Once you've done these, what kind of resources, what can I do to maybe move myself or my team from this middle column to the third column? And like any rubric, I mean, obviously the goal is to move whichever direction your rubric goals is to move to one side. This activity has resources linked for every one of those pieces of the rubric for the implementation rubric. It's really a comprehensive resource source. Again, feel free to take this. It does take some time if you're going to work through the implementation rubric, but that Ohio implementation, that OIP, if you would, I think is a real good resource to work with your teams as you work through the process, as kind of just a checklist type thing. You can kind of self-assess where are you at, and then this links you with all kinds of resources that you can use. So we would encourage you then to kind of, whether it's in a formal training session or just providing this to their principals that they can use with their staffs. So your next steps, our hope, again, if you've already familiar with the process, hopefully we didn't bore you too much by reviewing some of the steps to the process. But the next steps for us is to take this, for you to take some of this information back and share it with your collaborative teams. Schedule a follow-up coaching session if needed with any of us here at SST. And then you're working on, again, your schools are in cohort 1 to implement and monitor your current plan. We've kind of whipped through things kind of quickly. Either of you that are still on, do you have any kind of questions that maybe jog through the process, or as you've worked through the process before, were there any stumbling blocks that you've encountered as you've done the improvement process in the past?
I just think today's session just helped reaffirm that we're on the right track. Sometimes I have found that when creating the SMART goal, the drop downs sometimes are hard to get it to say what you want it to say. But I know that that's not us, but I do feel really good about where we are in the process. I'm excited to go back through a second time and look at how our needs assessment has changed from 3 years ago. I think that will be interesting. And the team completing the one needs assessment has tremendously grown. So I'm excited about that as well.
Good. Yeah, you're right about those goals. Sometimes when you use those drop downs, the goal statements end up kind of a little clunky.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you for all of this information. Everything was very helpful, especially as we get ready to sit down and look at these questions again. I feel like something that we kind of as a team struggle with is that root cause, like finding out exactly what is that root cause. So those I've seen the fishbone one before, but some of the other ones I think might be helpful to bring back to the team to get us, to really hone in on what is that root cause that's causing those things.
Good.
So thank you.
You're welcome. And we use the 5 whys frequently. You just keep asking why. There's a good video, you've probably seen it on YouTube, that talks about the Washington Monument. And if you haven't, look up the video on the Washington. It's about 1.5 minutes long. You can share with your staff. It kind of identifies a problem that they saw, but then the initial cause that they were thinking was not really the root cause, and just the steps that they then went through to kind of figure, oh, it wasn't the Washington, it was the Jefferson Memorial, I'm sorry. But that's a real good 1.5 minute video if you want to share it with your staff, that kind of talks about root cause analysis. And there are other tools for root cause analysis, but those are 2 that I know the department recommends. Thanks for sharing with us. Here is our contact information. And again, it's on the slides that we put in the chat. Eric Neal is our continuous improvement lead here at State Support Team 11. There's Morgan's email address. There's my email address. Obviously, if Morgan's coming out with you guys today, you'll be able to kind of interact with her one-on-one. And then there's ways you can connect with SST. We are on all kinds of social media. We've got a communications team internally that will put out stuff on Facebook and Twitter. We have podcasts that I know Eric has done, which are really good. And if you can find them on the SoundCloud, we also have a website that you can get to. So any of the things, there's a lot of resources that we can connect you with if you need them. The final piece for us, and we've ended a little bit early, so hopefully that's okay. If you have any more questions, we can stay on. There is a survey that will help us. We appreciate the feedback, but then also when you complete the survey, you'll get a certificate for your 1.5 contact hours for today's session if you need the contact hours for licensure or any other kind of things with your local agency. So thanks again for attending. I appreciate you being willing to participate with us. And again, any final questions? If not, we'll let you do the survey, and thank you again for attending.
Thank you so much.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for attending.